It's that time of the year, guys. It is time for my fall TBR. It is time for my fall TBR video, and I have just been looking forward to this video, I feel like, for at least a month now. I'm so ready for it to be fall. I feel like fall is just, we're just right on the edge of it, and it's just so close yet so far away. And I want to talk about all the books that I'm going to be reading this fall, so that way if any of you want to go out and buy any of these books because they sound really fun and amazing, then you'll have the opportunity to do that ahead of time. Now, the books that I'm going to be talking in today's video, I have a bunch of different genres that I'm going to be talking about. I will have some YA mystery or YA thriller books. I have some just regular mystery thriller books. I also have some romances, not that many, but I have a couple. And I also have some fantasy. So I kind of have a mixture, and dystopian. So I have a mixture of a lot of genres, not the type of genres I usually read a ton of. I feel like mystery thriller, I always have to be in the mood for that kind of book, but it's almost spooky season. And what better time to read a spooky book than in spooky season? I mean, it just makes sense to me. You don't have to listen to me. If you want to read happy sunshine types of books all day long, all year long, that's your prerogative. I don't care. But for me, anyways, as a mood reader, mystery thrillers is where it's at. I'm just going to briefly go through each of the books. Obviously, I haven't read any of these, so I don't know what I'm going to rate them yet, but I am going to just give like a brief synopsis of what each book is about, so that way if you feel like going and buying it for this fall, then you can do that. So the first book that I have in my fall TBR is Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. Now, this is a part of a series. This is just the first book in the series. I will decide to buy the rest of the series depending on how this one goes, but I have heard great things about it, so I'm really excited about it. It is about a girl who ends up going to this really super famous private school, and she's obsessed with true crime, and she decides that she wants to take on an old cold case that actually involves the school. The cold case involves the headmaster, or I guess the founder of this private school. His wife and daughter were kidnapped, and they were presumed dead a long time ago, and no one ever figured out what happened to them or where they went. So she decides she wants to take on this cold case and figure out what happened once and for all. And once she starts actually investigating into it, Truly Devious comes back, or someone who could possibly be pretending to be truly devious. I don't know, but it just sounds like a really cool kind of like high school Criminal Minds type book. It also kind of reminds me of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, which I haven't read yet, but I've heard great things about, so I'm sure it's along those lines. So if you enjoyed that book, you'll probably enjoy this book. The next book that I'm going to be reading this fall is For Found Dead by Natalie D. Richards. I've read a lot by this author, and I actually really love her writing style. I feel like all of her books are very fast-paced and just really fun to read. And in this one, the little blurb on the front literally says, "There were 7 of them working late, then the doors locked." I just think it sounds so fun and so spooky and just very like high stakes, survival of the fittest type stuff. So there's this group of coworkers, these teenage coworkers who work at a movie theater, which is inside this old mall. And at the end of the night, they're all closing up and some stuff starts happening. I think a stranger shows up who's not supposed to be there. And then all the lights go out and they actually don't have access to their phones, so they can't call for help. So in order for them to get out, they have to travel through this old mall, which has all the powers out, and also they find a dead body. It sounds like a lot of people are gonna die considering the title, For Found Dead. So I'm really intrigued about this one. I feel like it's just gonna be really like fast-paced and suspenseful, and I cannot wait. The next book that I'm going to be reading is called Secrets Never Die, and this is by Vincent Ralph. I love this author as well, just like Natalie D. Richards. I feel like Vincent Ralph is very similar in his writing style, where it's very fast-paced, very suspenseful, and just it keeps you guessing the entire time. And this one is about a group of friends who every year they hold this funeral where they bury all of their secrets, and they bury them in this like old hut out in the middle of the woods that they nicknamed the Dark Place. And this year, some of their secrets start coming back and terrorizing them. So someone is like, I guess, found their secrets in this hut, and they are using them for blackmail, and they are actually terrorizing them with all of these secrets that they thought that they buried. The next book that I'm going to be reading is called The Bite by Z.W. Taylor. Now, this one I opened in my unboxing video, and I kind of talked about it in that video, but it's about this girl who is trying to run away from a violent ex, and she ends up running into like the Alaskan wilderness, and while she's out, she ends up getting bitten on the leg by something. some things start happening. So the last sentence of it, it says, its bite will change her life forever. So I know that this one's gonna be really nostalgic. I think it's like a werewolf type paranormal book. I don't know much about this author. I've not heard a lot about this book either, but I'm really excited to give it a chance. I know there is a second book, so depending on how I like this one, I might buy the second one. We'll have to wait and see. But I do think that this will just be a really good cozy read because it's gonna give me like Twilight vibes. And the next book I'm going to be reading is This Delicious Death by Kayla Cottingham. I've never heard of this author before, but I saw this book in Target and I fell in love with the cover. But in this story, it is about a kind of like dystopian type world. It's like a future like post-apocalyptic type world. But a small percentage of the world goes through something called the hollowing. And when you go through the hollowing, you have this affinity to eat human flesh. So basically you become like a zombie, but they describe it kind of where like you're still a normal person, you still go about your day. However, you want to eat human flesh instead of food. So sounds interesting, but this small percentage, if you decide to not eat human flesh, then you will go like feral. And I think that's when you kind of turn more into like a zombie, like you go insane because you need human flesh to survive off of. But this group of friends, they end up going to this music festival out in the desert, and while they're there, one of their friends ends up going feral and she attacks and eats one of the band members of the concert. And I think this just sounds so funny. I feel like it's going to be really entertaining and enjoyable. And while they're at this music festival, people start going missing, and it looks like someone is targeting all these people who've gone through the hollowing. So it's a small percentage of the world. It's not everyone, but someone is targeting these people who went through the hollowing and trying to get rid of them. So it's this group of girls who are friends, and it seems like it's going to be them like trying to survive the night. The next book that I'm planning on reading is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. Now, I love this cover, and when I first saw it, I kind of saw how it was like distressed, and I thought it was just like an error on the printing or like the book was messed up, but it's meant to be that way, which I thought was so cool. It looks like an old-fashioned like horror movie from like my childhood, and I just think it looks amazing. It looks beautiful. But on the back, it literally says, "This book packs all the magic of a summer horror flick." So sounds really fun. It's about these two friends where they go skinny dipping, and after they go skinny dipping, one of the friends starts acting weird, and turns out she was possessed, and just like the cover says, it's my best friend's exorcism. So I think this one will be really funny, and just from everything that I'm reading on the back and all the different like authors who've commented on it, it just sounds like it's gonna be so fun and so nostalgic. So really looking forward to this one. The next book I'm going to be reading is called Assistant to the Villain, and it's by Hannah Nicole Mayer. Now, I saw this book at Target, and look at the sides. I haven't heard anyone talk about this book, but it sounds so fun and so cool. So it literally is called Assistant to the Villain, so that's essentially what it is. But the main character, she lives in, it's this kind of like fantasy world. So the world that you're living in, it's called Renadon, and it's this kind of like fantasy type world, I guess, where there are villains and heroes and stuff like that. But in this book, the main character, she needs a job because she is supporting her family, and she ends up seeing this job opportunity with her kingdom's infamous villain, and she takes the job, and it sounds like it's like kind of like the grumpy sunshine trope, where it's the villain is this grumpy old boss and she's the sunshine happy-go-lucky girl, and it is a romance. But the main character, she is working for this villain, and someone seems to be trying to bring down the kingdom and also bring down the villain who she has a crush on. So she's kind of becoming a detective to figure out who the rat is in their kingdom, who's trying to ruin everything and mess up the way that their kingdom is run. The next book I have is Ghosted by J.M. Darhauer. This book I also opened during my unboxing video, and in this one it sounds like it's a second chance romance where the main character, her and her high school sweetheart had a child together. However, her high school sweetheart, he doesn't know that they had a child, and he's actually a famous actor, so he comes back home and finds out he has a child and he wants to make amends. So if you've ever seen Forever My Girl, that's what this sounds like. It sounds very similar to that whole plot, but I am very excited to read this one. I think it's going to be really cute. I've heard some really good things about it, so I'm looking forward to this one. The next book or book series that I'm going to be reading is the MindF series. No, I'm not going to pronounce that word on camera. I must say I have heard of the series a while ago, and I've always put it off just because of the title. The title kind of threw me off, and also the picture on the front. It kind of freaked me out, so I never wanted to touch it or buy it. However, I've heard so many good things about it. I've heard all my favorite like booktubers talk about this book and say how amazing it was and how much they loved this book and this series. It is books 1 through 5, so you can see it's a pretty thick book. However, I think if like you split this up into like the 5 books, they would all be really small books. So I've heard a lot of people say they flew through it, especially since it is 5 books put into one big book. And it is about this girl who is a serial killer, and it's about her relationship or her romance with the FBI agent who's trying to hunt her down. It sounds amazing, actually. I don't know if I need to be admitted after I read this book, but I've heard so many good things about it and I'm so excited to read it. And it just sounds so fun. I love Criminal Minds, and it just sounds like it's a Criminal Minds episode where the serial killer and the FBI agent just happen to fall in love. And I think it's so funny. But the FBI agent who she's dating does not know she's the serial killer. He's trying to figure out who the serial killer is. Meanwhile, she's just chilling. It's me. I'm so excited to read this one. Next book I'm going to be reading is called The Collective by Allison Galen. This is another book I opened during my unboxing video, and this one just sounds so interesting. This is like a completely different type of storyline that I've ever heard of. Like, I've never heard of another book like this, so I'm really excited about it. But it is about this grieving mother whose daughter passed away, and she ends up wanting to seek like retribution for her daughter's death. And there's this like young man who I guess is like really rich and entitled, and she blames him for her daughter's death and she wants to get revenge. So meanwhile, she ends up on the dark web and she finds this group of women called The Collective. And this group of women, they all kind of band together to kind of play out each other's like revenge fantasies. And I think the main character, she doesn't think it's real. She feels like it's fake and it's just them like all talk, you know? However, they actually do it. So this book will be just about her kind of getting enmeshed in this group and just being like caught up in all of it. So I'm really excited and very curious about how this book will play out. The next book I'm going to read, I've had this book for so long, probably over a year now, if I think about it. And I've just been waiting for the fall time. I've been waiting for spooky season to read this book, and I'm so excited to read it. So it's called The Troupe by Nick Cutter. And if you just read the blurb at the top, it's Stephen King wrote this. And he said, "The Troupe scared the heck out of me, and I couldn't put it down. This is old school horror at its best." I mean, who better than Stephen King to just really make me want to buy this book? So this book, it's about a group of Boy Scouts who end up trekking out into the Canadian wilderness to like camp, and while they're out there they come across this man who's very like emaciated and he just looks disgusting. It turns out that he is carrying a bioengineered virus, and this virus slowly starts to infect the rest of the troop, and it's definitely going to be like survival of the fittest, but it sounds really intriguing and I feel like it's going to be keeping me up at night because this sounds terrifying. The next book I'm reading is called Falling by TJ Newman. Now I'm just gonna read the paragraph on the back because I feel like this is the best way to explain this book. "You just boarded a flight to New York. There are 143 other passengers on board. What you don't know is that 30 minutes before the flight, your pilot's family was kidnapped. For his family to live, everyone on your plane must die. The only way the family will survive is if the pilot follows his orders and crashes the plane. Enjoy the flight." This is like my worst nightmare. Being on a plane and having some sort of hostage situation where it's gonna force everyone to crash and most likely die. Next book I'm going to be reading is The Housemaid by Frida McFadden, and I know a lot of people have read this book. I'm kind of late to the game on this one, but I'm really excited to read this one because I don't think I've actually read any Frida McFadden books, and I know she's really well known and she has really great books. But this is about a maid who works for this really wealthy family, and it turns out that this family has some secrets that she doesn't know about. And the last line is what really sold me on this one. It says, "By the time I realize my attic bedroom door only locks from the outside, it's far too late." This sounds so good. I know it's going to be really fast paced and I'm really excited to read this one. The next book I'm going to be reading, I also opened this during my unboxing video, is Unmissing by Minka Kent. And this book just sounds really cool. That once again, it kind of sounds like a Criminal Minds episode in a way, but it is about this couple who's kind of living the dream. They have like the dream house, dream family, dream careers, everything. And the husband's wife from 10 years ago, who went missing and presumed dead, shows up on his doorstep asking for help. So the couple decides to bring her in, kind of help her get back on her feet. However, things start kind of going weird. The wife doesn't trust this ex-wife, I guess you could call her the ex-wife. And this woman has secrets about what happened, where she was, and everything. So I feel like this one's gonna have a lot of twists and turns, and I'm really looking forward to seeing if there's like a cool plot twist at the end. I think it's just gonna be really cool and really interesting. The next book I'm gonna be reading is Truly Darkly Deeply by Victoria Selman. The main character is this young girl who, whenever she was younger, I think like 10 years ago, her and her mom were kind of living on their own, and this man started dating her mom. However, at the time, there was a serial killer out and about who was killing women who looked very similar to her mom. And the mom ends up giving up this guy who she's dating, thinking that he's the serial killer, and he gets convicted and sent to prison for life. And it's like 10 years later, and the girl, she ends up getting a message from, or a letter from the man who's in jail asking for her to come in so he can answer her questions. And she had like a really good relationship with him 10 years ago. So it was kind of a big shock whenever he got convicted of these crimes. And turns out he has a ton of information to share with her. So I'm really intrigued about this one. And it says on the back it has a wicked twist. So we'll see if they're right. The next book I'm going to be reading is Belladonna by Adeline Grace, and I've heard a lot of good things about this book. Also, I did see that the second book just came out, which I probably will read after I read this one, and I just fell in love with the cover. This looks so freaking pretty, and also when you take the dust jacket off, even the book underneath is like gorgeous, so very excited about that. This book is about a girl who has lived her whole life. She's been an orphan, and she's lived her whole life bouncing from guardian to guardian, and every guardian that she seems to go and live with ends up dying. So she's become very familiar with the concept of death and how life is very fleeting. And in this book, what's different about this is Death is actually a side character. Death is an actual character in this book, and he's described as this shadowy being who's always following this girl. And it sounds like it's kind of a romance between this girl and Death. I don't know how that's gonna work. I'm trying to figure that out, and I'm sure it'll make sense, hopefully, when I'm reading the book. But this girl, she ends up going and living with her last living relatives. And while she's living there, it turns into kind of like a mystery where the main character's aunt who passed away, her spirit comes and communicates with her and says, "I was poisoned." So then it turns into this whole like who done it and how did this happen? And the main character, she enlists the help of Death to help her figure out what happened to her aunt who passed away. Murder mystery plus a side romance with Death himself. The next books I'm going to be reading, it is a duology and it's a fantasy, and it's The King of Battle and Blood, and the second book is Queen of Myth and Monsters. So I'm really excited to read these books. This is actually like a vampire fantasy, and it's about this main character who goes and marries the vampire king. So she's human, but she goes to marry the vampire king in order to protect her kingdom, and her goal is to assassinate him. And however, whenever she goes to assassinate him, things go wrong. He catches her, and he basically threatens her, "If you try that again, I'm going to turn you into a vampire, the one thing that you hate the most." And so she ends up having to stay and live with him and kind of figure out the whole vampire court and how to survive that and all the politics and the relationships that go along with that. So it sounds really interesting. I've heard good things, and I'm really excited to read this one. I feel like it'll be very similar to Blood and Ash series from Blood and Ash series, because that also has vampires in it. So I feel like it'll kind of be very similar to that series. The next book I'm going to be reading, it's once again another fantasy. This is Ballad of Nightmares, and it's actually a duology. This is just the first book. I don't know when the second book's going to come out, but we'll see how I like this one. Maybe I'll buy the second one eventually, and it's by Jack Whitney. This one, once again, it's very similar to Belladonna in where Death is a character in this book. So Death runs his own kingdom within this fantasy world, and the main character, she is going to try to conquer him. So she's going to his kingdom in like secret, and she's going to try to assassinate him so she can take over his world and just say that she was able to conquer death. So I think this one's also a romance. So we'll see. Once again, I think the main character is gonna fall in love with Death, and I don't know how Death can be a character, but I'm hoping these books can open my eyes to that, because I honestly don't see how that could possibly work, but it sounded really intriguing, so I'm gonna give it a shot. The next 4 books I'm going to be reading is the Hunger Games trilogy and the prequel that came out, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. I have read the Hunger Games trilogy. I have not read the prequel yet, so that's why I wanted to add that on to my TBR. And also I wanted to reread the Hunger Games series because the movie for The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes comes out, I think maybe this December. So I want to kind of get ready for that, and I want to read the book before the movie comes out. And also I just know the Hunger Games, it's very nostalgic. I loved the series when I was growing up, so I'm really excited to read these and also watch the movies before the new movie comes out, so I can kind of remember everything, all the information that happened in this world. It's a dystopian. I don't really feel like I have to explain this series to you guys, just because everyone and their mother has heard of the Hunger Games and knows what it's about, or you've at least heard of it. So the next book I'm going to be reading is Girl, Serpent, and Thorn by Melissa Basherdoust. I don't know if I said that right. But the little blurb on the front says, sometimes the princess is the monster. So the way it explains it, this is once again another fantasy, and it is set in this world where there's like this kingdom, and the main character is a princess, and she is cursed to be poisonous to everyone who touches her. Ladies and gentlemen, Shatter Me series right here. It sounds just like the Shatter Me series, so I'm really excited to see. I enjoyed that series, so I'm excited to see how this one differs from that series. I hope it has enough that's different, because it'll be really disappointing if it follows the same plot line as Shatter Me. But it's about this princess, and her twin brother is getting married, and so she's finally being let out of kind of like her cage that she's in, where she can't be near people. And this book is very much about like the struggle that the princess is going through between being good or being evil with this power that she has, or this curse that she has. And I also think that there's a romance in this. The next book I'm gonna be reading is called Sister Maiden Monster by Lucy A. Snyder. This one, the cover is what sold me, and it just sounds really cool. Once again, it's kind of like in a post-apocalyptic world where there was a virus that devastated the world, and this book follows 3 different women, and I guess they'll intertwine throughout the book, I'm assuming, but they all have something different that happened to them once this virus hit. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see how their different lives and things that they experienced, how they all kind of intertwine in this book. And the last book that is on my fall TBR is The Whispering Dark by Kelly Andrew. This one sounds really interesting, and I'm really excited to read this one. It is about this girl who is deaf, and she ends up getting accepted into this prestigious program where they teach their students how to step in between worlds, or like parallel worlds. So that right away, it definitely sounds like the movie Insidious, and I'm wondering if it's going to be kind of similar, but it just sounds really cool. And while she's at this school, she ends up running into this boy who she met 12 years ago. And the way they met was he was dead and he came back to life right in front of her. So they have this very weird connection, and they meet back up again at the school, and they kind of get thrust together into this kind of team, this detective team, because a student at their school ends up going missing or is dead or something. And so they're trying to figure out what happened and how walking through the worlds, you know, if this is creating this impact on death and living things. And that is it for my fall TBR video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope that hopefully these books sound exciting to you. I'm really looking forward to reading them and reporting back what my thoughts were and my ratings were. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Goodbye.